Hey everybody, welcome to ARE Live. I'm Mark Tier, the founder of Black Spectacles, and today we'll be taking a sneak peek at one of Mike's top tips for passing the ARE, which is straight from his A’19 presentation. And that tip is know your contracts. So knowing contracts and how they relate to the ARE is certainly a key for passing the exams. So today we're going to show you guys what you need to know about the A101, the B101, and the A201 when you take the exam. At our next ARE Live, we'll be sharing success stories from recently licensed architects that we meet at the A’19 Conference on Architecture. So you'll be able to listen to useful study habits and exam taking strategies from different attendees who've passed ARE using Black Spectacles. So you can stop by our booth, which is number 7138, and we will be giving away free Black Spectacles t-shirts and I think some pop sockets.
Oh, the t-shirts are always a big draw, so you gotta
we're doing pop sockets this year, so
that's pretty cool too.
Yeah. So anyways, if you're going to be there, feel free to stop by for sure. A couple updates. So you may have heard that Black Spectacles is the first ever NCARB approved test prep provider for all 6 of the ARE 5.0 divisions, and that includes all of our study materials, the lectures, the practice exams, the flashcards. And one note here: if you're looking for support and structure while studying, you're welcome to register for our next group coaching cohort. Group coaching, so the next one is on June 14th. You get basically assigned to a small group of people with a licensed architect who's your coach, and then you also get access to all of our to our lectures, practice exams, and flashcards. So heads up that's June 14th is the next cohort is opened. And then, as I always like to tell people, if you'd like your boss to pay for Black Spectacles membership, be sure to tell them about our firm licenses. Now, we're doing something interesting and new this time around. So you can learn more about the differences between an individual subscription and a group subscription on Thursday, so in 2 days at noon, for our first ever Black Spectacles ARE 5.0 product demonstration. It'll be a webinar just like this, and one of our account executives, Ty and our AJ, will walk everyone through the Black Spectacles learning modules and highlight the features that make make our content so helpful. And today, if that's not of interest to you, that's fine, of course. We have a special discount on Black Spectacles individual memberships to share, so we'll provide that coupon at the end of the show. My guest today, Mr. Mike Newman. If you don't know Mike, he's a senior lecturer at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. He's also the founder of Shed Studio, and he is the instructor for Black Spectacles online ARE exam prep. Thank you, Mike, for joining us today. I should note, Mike is going to be doing a presentation, the top tips to pass the ARE at A’19 in Las Vegas. So if you haven't already signed up for that, I encourage you to do so. Yeah, it's always sold out, so I don't know if it's sold out. This year they actually were able to get you a much bigger
It's a much bigger room,
venue,
so we should have some space, but yeah.
So anyways, I'd like to encourage you guys to come out. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Mike.
Okay, all right, so as Mark said, we'll be talking about a whole range of issues at the A’19, but because of that, because of the whole range of issues, we have to move, pretty quickly through it. So today we just wanted to take a chance to dive into one of them, get it a little bit deeper, and so we thought contracts would be a great one to really put our teeth into. So today we're going to be talking about the kind of trying to navigate through the contracts. So clearly, when you're looking at contracts, they all look like contracts. They're all very legalese. They're all written by lawyers. They all kind of look the same. It looks sort of like anything you'd see from any other contractual situation. But if you look deeply, you realize that no, they're actually really quite different from each other. And of course they're quite different from each other because the roles that everybody plays are so different. And so we're going to first, just for today, what we're going to talk about is the sort of standard design, bid, build project delivery system. So that's the project delivery. Whoop, was that me? Sorry about that if everybody heard that one.
I think Siri's a little upset.
Siri's upset with me for
in this part of the meeting, or part of the webinar.
That's right. So design, bid, build is the sort of standard, like, all right, we're going to do a project. There's going to be a client, the owner client is going to hire the architect. They're going to have a relationship for a long time as they go through, figure out the design, go through schematic design, design development, into contract documents, and then eventually bid it out to a number of potential bidders. And those bidders, one will get chosen, that becomes the general contractor. Then a new contract is made between the owner and the general contractor, and then they build it out. There's a bunch of great advantages to that system, the biggest one being that you've worked it all out with the owner before any contractors get too deep into it. You then bid it out, so we now know like what the low bids are, we know what the range of bids are, we have a lot of information. One of the downsides to design bid build is that it's long. You have to go through that whole process of designing and then the contractors start to go, and it can take a long time. And one of the other potential downsides to it is that by the time you do go through that whole design process, you're maybe a couple months into the process before anybody else, any other contractors actually look at it and give you any feedback on pricing, which obviously can be problematic. So there's positives and negatives to design bid build. Some of the other examples would be design build, construction manager, multiple prime, fast track. Those are all different versions of project delivery. And each of those different versions of project delivery would have a different set of contracts. But because design bid build is sort of the default setting, if you will, it's the assumed, if it doesn't say what the type of project delivery is, then everybody would naturally assume design bid build. So we're going to use those contracts as our sort of mainstay, and I think generally the exam will do the same. Now, they may also ask you questions about some of the other ones, but the majority of questions that will come at you would be regarding design bid build. And so the design bid build, the contracts that we're talking about here are going to be the B101, which is the owner architect agreement. One of the things I always say when I talk about this is why they use the B for the architect and not the A for the architect. I have no idea, but the B's are all architect related. And then the A101, which is the owner contractor agreement. So all of the A's are contractor related. And then all of the other, design build and construction managers and consultant agreements and everything all have slightly different numbering systems. One thing that's worth noting is that the B101 and the A101 are the two the sort of big standard, like any project you can do. But if you were doing, say, a smaller project, then there's other versions. If you're doing a very, very large project, then there's another version of each of these. So there's actually like 5 or 6 different versions of these, some that are tiny and a couple pages, some that are many, many pages. And the idea is that you sort of find the appropriate one for the scale of the project. Like it doesn't really make any sense to use a 40-page document to do a kitchen edition. So you would frighten off your clients if you did that, right? So you try to find the right contract for the particular job that you're talking about. But if we're going to sort of talk standards, the B101 and the A101 are the two flagship contracts of the whole system. If you actually went and listed them all out, there's hundreds of different contracts by the time you go through all of the variations. You don't really need to worry too much about that, but you should after you get a handle on the B101, the A101, and then we'll also take a quick look into the A201, the general conditions. Once you get a handle on those three, then you would want to start branching out a little bit. You don't need to memorize everything of other ones, but just to get a sense of what they're like so you have some idea about what's going on. All right, so as I said, here we are, we're comparing the B101 and the A101. And the reason we're comparing these is because it's really important for you to just read the contracts and get to know what's written into these contracts. So I want you to read them. So I'm just going to even underline that to make the point. You really do need to read them. Having said that, if you just sat down and read these contracts, your eyes are going to glaze over immediately and you're going to sort of not be thinking about the fact that they are just very contract sounding. So you need to sort of understand what the themes are in the contracts in order to see what's actually going on. So you want to read them, but read them with your sort of your antenna up to pick up specific pieces of information. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on a couple of different themes that are going to be sort of pretty clearly shown once we take a look at the actual contracts. All right, so some of the key concepts. When we're talking about the B101, and like I said, this is the one with the owner-architect agreement, and so we start with that one because that's the start of the project. You don't get to the A101 until you start having bidders and such. So we're starting with the B101, and we think about, well, what is the nature of the B101? And it's an odd thing. Like, when you think of a contract, you think of, well, it wants to be very set in stone. It wants to be something that's like really clear. Like, I am contracting with you, and I'm gonna give you X amount of dollars, and you're gonna give me 10 widgets for those dollars, or something. Like some very simple, straightforward idea. But obviously, for architects, the whole architectural process just isn't that straightforward. Like, it wouldn't really make sense for you to have a contract where the architectural contract says, okay, I as the owner will pay you $100, and you will provide a drawing that's 24 inches by 36 inches and has 10 markings on it. Like, that doesn't even make any sense. Like that kind of clarity is actually not useful. It would be clear, you could know exactly what you needed to do, but it's just not useful. It's not what an architectural process is like. So what is the architectural process? Well, it's all about ideas, design, compliance. Okay, compliance. So what are you doing? You are having a conversation with the owner. The contract is about creating the process of a conversation with the owner to discuss ideas, design, compliance with codes, compliance with the program needs, compliance with all of those things. And you're going to develop a design intent. So it's all about the ideas that are going to be generated that haven't been generated yet, right? When the contract is signed, it's just a program. It's a list of desires, and you're turning it into a design intent. That design intent is about conceptual ideas of design, hierarchies, wayfinding, things like that, showing compliance with zoning codes, building codes, other codes, having ideas that are representative of the needs of the client. So these are all fairly fluid and flexible concepts. This is not a situation where you could just say, yeah, I need a 24 by 36 drawing. Like, that just doesn't fit to this list of issues. So the contract, we'll notice pretty quickly when we start going through it, is going to be filled with issues that are about flexibility and reasonableness and discussion effectively. Now, the A101, the key concepts here are going to be about achieving. They're going to be about fulfilling. They're going to be about actually building it, right? Making something. So effectively, what's being said here is While the B101 is all about this sort of flexibility and inclusiveness of discussion ideas and trying to find a balance between compliance issues and design intentions, the A101 is all about, did you build it? If you built it, we'll pay you. So the A101 effectively is much simpler than the B101 because its needs are so straightforward. Now, of course, construction is complicated, and weather and payment systems and tariffs and who knows what can all play into it. So the A101 does get complicated, but all of its complications are subservient to the idea: did you build it? If you did, then we pay you. Whereas the B101 with the architects, it's always going to be all about creating a discussion between the two players, the owner and the architect's team, in order to find the right balance of a design intent. So the B101 tends to be much more loose and fluid and flexible. The A101 tends to be much more straightforward. So they're going to look a lot alike, but they're actually going to be quite different from each other. So let's take a look at the actual contracts. We're going to just jump right in here. It's going to be a little awkward here, but. So here's an example of the B101 straight from the AIA. The first thing that you notice is in the sort of naming of the process here, the naming of the contract. So we're going to take a quick look and kind of go down here. Grab this. All right, so we start looking through and we see that there's a name here, and it's an agreement between the architect is listed, and there's the name of the architect, Fab Design Studio, and here's the project name. The owner is listed. The black spectacles in this case is presumed to be the owner. And then there's a project description spot. We can list out everything that's there. So there's all sorts of information that's being gathered in this moment here in order to sort of fully dress up kind of everybody knows exactly what's going on. And then at the bottom of that page is the owner and the architect agree to the following, right? And then comes all sorts of information. So we've got all of the essentially the table of contents of what the rest of the contract is going to look like. Okay, so we just looked at the naming. Let's take a look at the A101 and take a look at what the naming looks like there. So here we have the owner, we have the general contractor, and then there's a series of information pieces here that are going to talk about, well, what is actually being built. And it's interesting, this is a contract between the owner and the general contractor. And yet, look, there you are as the architect, right there. You are in their contract. You're not signing it, it's not your contract, but you are in their contract. And that's because it wouldn't make any sense for them to have a contract that didn't acknowledge the work that you had done. The whole point of their contract is you have developed a design intent and you've handed it over, and now the GC with this contract is going to fulfill that design intent. They're going to achieve the design intent. And so right off the bat, you see that these things are different from each other because in the timeline of events, they are different, and the expectations, they're different. So, okay, let's talk about expectations for a second. We're going to go back to the B101. So we're in the owner-architect agreement. You have some of the initial information here, what some of the physical characteristics are. Remember, this is being done at the beginning of the process, so what are the main things you need to know in order to be able to work on the project and have everybody on the same page? some estimates for what the construction budget can be. Doesn't really make any sense for the architect to work on a project if they don't have an idea of what the budget is. Obviously, you would design, to your desired budget, not the actual budget. There's then a place there to talk about the timeline and kind of all those things that are going on. I'm going to keep moving forward here for a second. And we're going to get into the second section. This is all the consultants here that were being listed out, all the other people who are being brought in. All right, and here we are in the Article 2. And Article 2 is about the responsibilities that the architect is going to be taking on. So let's just, as an example, read out one section. So I'm going to read out section 2.2. So that's right here. The architect shall perform its services consistent with the professional skill and care ordinarily provided by architects practicing in the same or similar locality under the same or similar circumstances. The architect shall perform its services as expeditiously as is consistent with such professional skill and care and the orderly progress of the project. So what's happening there is that this is, you probably have heard of the term, the standard of care. This is this idea of like, what are you being legally held to when you talk about a contract? Well, it's not that the project is going to be perfect or beautiful or any of those things, because there's no way you could really contractually do that. Like, it wouldn't make any sense to say, I guarantee you with this contract, this will be the most beautiful building in the world. Like, how would you ever do that contractually? It doesn't really make any sense. But what you can say is that it's competent and it's designed in a way that will be compliant with the codes, and it will meet all of the basic needs that the client has asked for the architect to do. And if it doesn't, for some reason, if there's some problem point that comes along the way, then the question of whether you did it accurately, whether you were negligent or responsible, is going to be, well, what would another architect in a similar situation, doing a similar project in a similar location, what would they do? Would they have made the same kinds of decisions that you made? So it's, in the end, it's not about the beauty or any of those things. It's about, is it competent and is it going to fulfill the basic needs, right? Those are very slippery ideas, right? It's sort of talking about, you're going to do your work as expeditiously as possible. You're going to inform the owner of the flow of the project. You're going to have discussions with the owner. Like, if we then kind of move on to a little bit farther down the way here. Let's go to 323. I'm just going to read this one little spot right here. Section 323. The architect shall present its preliminary evaluation to the owner and shall discuss with the owner alternative approaches to design and construction of the project. The architect shall reach an understanding with the owner regarding the requirements of the project. So what they're effectively doing here is, this is a contract saying you will reach an understanding in the future. We are contracting to say that the whole point of this is we're going to have a discussion, and then we're going to come to a meeting of minds about what the point of what we're doing is. Again, it's about ideas, it's about design, it's about a design intent, and it's the discussion is what the contract is doing. It's the discussion to create all of that, partly from the baggage of information that the architect brings, which is knowledge of codes and systems of design, and partly from the specifics of the project and the program that the owner brings to the table. So they bring a site, they bring a program, and with those two bunches of information, a conversation is had, and it ends up creating the design intent. So right built into the B101 is this idea of this very sort of fluid discussion, design, idea-focused thing. Let's look at another quick little example here, and then we'll jump over to the A101. I'm going to jump ahead to the A'31. So I just want to call out a couple of words out of this. And so the B101 3.3.1, based on the owner's approval of the schematic design documents and the owner's authorization of any adjustments to the project requirements and the budget for the cost of the work, the architect shall prepare design development drawing documents for the owner's approval. The design development documents shall illustrate and describe the development of the approved schematic design documents and shall consist of drawings and other documents, including plans, sections, elevations, typical construction details, and diagrammatic layouts of building systems to fix and describe the size and character of the project as to architectural, structural, mechanical, and electrical systems. So think of that word character. You're describing the character of the design intent. Can you imagine saying to, on the A101, saying to the contractor, we just want you to kind of capture the character of what the design drawings say? I mean, that wouldn't even, there's no way you would sign that because it would be too open and fluid. The A101 is going to be, can you achieve it? Can you build it? The B101 is going to be, let's have the discussion, let's get onto the same page, we'll go back and forth, you're going to talk about the character of something, we're going to understand the character, we'll then sign off. So it's all about that level of back and forth. So let's take a look over at the A101 and kind of think about some related similar elements. So I'm going to jump over here to section 2. So I'm going to go by section 1. So section 1 is talking about all of the same kinds of things that section 1 on the B101 did, which is the starting dates and the timeline. In this case, that timeline is going to be very important. Okay. Here's Article 2, the work of this contract. The contractor shall fully execute the work described in the contract documents, except as specifically indicated in the contract documents to be the responsibility of others. So think how different that sentence is from what we were just reading in the B101, where it was all about reasonableness and character and conversation and sign off. What this one says is the contractor shall fully execute the work, period, right? This contract is about finishing the building. And so once you see that, everything else, that difference between these two, every other part of these contracts falls in line. So let's look at another quick example. Let's go to 3.3. Okay, under 3.3.3, if the contractor fails to achieve substantial completion as provided in this section, liquidated damages, if any, shall be assessed as set forth in blah, blah, blah. So what's going on there? What it's saying is not only do you need to achieve it, but there are potentially problems. Like you actually have potentially damages. You lose money if you don't actually do the work that the contract says you're going to do. So it's not just that it says you have to complete the project, it's that the whole contract is built around the idea of how do we make sure that they actually complete the project. Now, there's also lots of protections for the contractor built in. How do we make sure they get paid reasonably? How do we make sure that something that's out of their control, like weather or something like that, doesn't force them into an unreasonable situation? There's plenty of protections for the contractor, but no matter how you read this document, it is about describing how they're going to achieve the work, they're going to build the work, and then the owner will pay them. Now, the process of paying is interesting and complicated with retainage and all sorts of other intriguing things which we can talk about elsewhere. So it's complicated, but the gist of it is very simple and straightforward. Let's jump back to the B101 for a moment, and we're going to look at controlling the costs of the project. So I'm going to jump kind of far ahead here and go to 6.3. Okay, here we are at 6.3. In preparing estimates of the cost of the work, the architect shall be permitted to include contingencies for design, bidding, and price escalation to determine what materials, equipment, component systems, and types of construction are to be included in the contract documents. To recommend reasonable adjustments in the program and scope of the project, and to include design alternates as may be necessary to adjust the estimated cost of the work to meet the owner's budget. The architect's estimate of the cost of the work shall be based on current area, volume, or similar conceptual estimating techniques. If the owner requires a detailed estimate of the cost of the work, the architect shall provide such an estimate if identified as the architect's responsibility in supplemental services. So there's kind of a lot of stuff there, but what's going on there is they're saying, look, it's very unlikely that any project is going to go smoothly from a design conversation straight into meeting exactly the right budget. It's just difficult. It's just anybody who's done anything in construction or in design knows that things are more expensive than you might think, or there's complications, or it turns out the permits cost more if you do X instead of Y. There's all sorts of reasons why these things can become sort of complicated. So what 6.3 is delineating in the owner-architect agreement is saying, look, expect there to be a flexibility built into this by having the architect not only make a design, but also make alternates that might be more appealing to the owner, but where the architect knows it'll cost more and they need to be able to take the alternate out or put it in, match it to the budget, get information on different design possibilities, different materials, things like that, because there's a fluidity to this process. And so 6.3 is trying to take that very complicated and fluid process and put it down into contract terms. So they're trying to make it as open-ended as possible in order to give the owner and the architect enough room to be able to match the budget with the desire, but they have to make it still a contract. And so this is the effort to do that. So now we're going to take a quick look at the A101, the owner-contractor agreement, and kind of see what that version is. So when we look at the 4.2 section, you'll see that in the contract with the owner and contractor, in the agreement, under section 4.2 alternates, there's a whole series of these moments where any of the alternates that have been listed in the bidding process, any of the extra materials that we want to have kind of considered for being put in, it's no longer a sort of fluid, open discussion. Now there's a place and a price, a place and a price. Everything is there to be able to be nailed down so that when the number comes back, and if it's too high, we can cross off alternate 3 and we can underline alternate 2 and say yes to 2 and no to 3, but it's all set up with the price. So this is how do we take that complicated, fluid conversation that was happening in the B101 and how do we make it fit to be relatable for the A101 in its mode of will achieve, will build, will make happen kind of mode. Right? And the way that they do that is by this little section right here, which allows you to put specific prices to specific alternates so that everything can get added up. And even if we don't include any of the alternates or don't include any of the allowances, well, we've got all the information right there. So again, these sort of basic themes of design concept and discussion for the B101 and will achieve and make it happen for the A101, those two very distinct ways of thinking about it, which should fit very much into how you think about what the role of the architect is versus what the role of the general contractor is. They are being played out through these contracts. All right, let's look at one more section here. I'm going to go to the B101 for a moment. So this is the owner-architect agreement. And we're going to look at 3612. Oh, that's 61. Oh, I'm sorry. Hang on a quick second here. Let me get myself oriented.
Perhaps one of the things to note here, Mike, while you're looking through these, is that the NCARB, so the ARE, which is written by NCARB, specifically uses the AIA contracts.
Absolutely.
To test you on. But you should note that there are other contracts out there that other organizations have created, but the AIA has created the primary contracts. Of course, they're written to try to help sort of balance all the differing needs between architects and the client and the contractors and engineers and so forth, but the AIA is writing them. But there are other organizations who write some too, so sometimes you'll come across different types of contracts, but in this case, when you're taking the ARE, you really only need to focus on the AIA contracts, which is why Mike's going through these.
Right. And you'll also, I mean, you can imagine if you were a contractor, you might think, really, we're going to use contracts that were designed by the Architecture Association? Like that could be a little problematic. So other players definitely have some issues with these. But in general, most people, they've been developed over many generations, and there's a lot of court history, litigation history, precedent that has been built up over decades. And so in general, they're pretty well accepted, but you absolutely will see multiple versions of this, other people who produce these. All right, so I'm gonna look at section 3.6.1.2. And I just wanted to sort of pull this one out because I think it sort of tells a little bit of an interesting story here, which is the architect shall advise and consult with the owner during the construction phases. The architect shall have the authority to act on behalf of the owner, which right there is kind of an interesting thing, right? What they're saying there is this is such a complicated set of situations where we're making a contract between the owner and the architect, but we're foreseeing all of this work that's going to be happening once another contract has been made between the owner and the contractor. And so it's writing right in here saying, there's a bunch of times when the architect is going to speak for the owner. So in the first phases, we're designing, we're working with, we're discussing, we're challenging each other, we're doing all of those things in order to figure out what the design intent is. And then the second part of all of what's going on is once we have that design intent, we're now, as an architect, helping the owner have the discussion with the contractor so that they can actually achieve the correct project, the correct design intent. And so right built into it, it says you actually speak for the owner. Not for everything, not for all of their financial issues and a bunch of other stuff, but for many aspects of the conversations to come, you actually can speak for the owner, and that's a positive and useful thing. Let's look at one more section here. I'm going to go to 364. Excuse me, 3624. So here we are, 3624. Under this one, the most interesting part here, let's just sort of take a quick read. Interpretations and decisions of the architect shall be consistent with the intent of and reasonably inferable from the contract documents, and shall be in writing or in the form of drawings. So this is one of those moments where you're like, how do we take something as complicated as design intent that includes all of these overlapping complications of meeting codes with compliance, but also having to meet the program, but also being part of a desire to set a certain design aesthetic. How do we do all that and put it into a design intent. Now, clearly no drawing set, no contract documents actually draw every single aspect of a building. It just doesn't happen. It's not plausible. So you're drawing an intent. The spec is showing an intent, and from that intent, series of other people, the general contractor, their subs, various other suppliers and people will be producing shop drawings. They'll be producing mock-ups and actually producing the building and asking questions and RFIs and all of those kinds of things, because they will need to clarify that design intent in order to be able to actually build it. And so what this one section is saying is that all of those interpretations and decisions of the architect. So like if somebody asks you a question and you say, yes, it's the design intent of our drawings is that all of the toilets are gold plated. If it doesn't actually say that it should be gold plated, or it doesn't actually say that we want to, make a very lavish looking place, if that's not reasonably inferable from the drawings that you put out, then it's not reasonable to expect the A101, the owner-contractor agreement, it's not reasonable to expect the contractor to assume that they should have been gold-plated. Like, what this section is talking about is trying to level that flexibility and sort of difficulty to nail things down for the architectural phase. But when you make the leap into the construction phase, we have to be able to be reasonable about it and not assume information is being handed over that we actually didn't hand over. So here's one of those examples of those sort of slippery words, talking about interpretations of decisions, talking about intent, using the word reasonably inferable, right? You can't really imagine saying, we hope that the contractor will, get the project done, assuming a reasonably inferable. Like, you would never use those terms in the A101. It just doesn't fit to that kind of setting. So when you see these sort of flexible terms, you're in the B101, the architect's world. When you see those things like achieve and fulfill, you know that you're in the A101 and the contractor's world. Let's take one quick look at a couple more contractor spots. Okay.
While Mike is looking at these guys, if you have any questions, you can throw them in the question box here. We'll try to get a couple of questions answered during the session.
So one thing just to sort of note, when you read through the A101, the owner-contractor agreement, you'll find that a pretty big percentage of it is kind of talking about how do we get paid? How does the contractor get paid? And if you think about it, that makes perfect sense, right? If the contract is about fulfilling the process of building and getting the building done, and then how much they're going to get paid for that, it makes sense that a big chunk of the contract would be about, all right, when do I get paid? How do I get paid? How much money do I get paid each time? How does the payment process work, right? Whereas similar issues will show up on the B101, but they're going to be more fluid and open to possibility. They're going to be more focused on milestones and different ways of approaching how the payment process can work. So again, once you start reading through the two of them, as long as you have these themes in mind, you should be able to sort of have a pretty clear idea of what's going on. And then I'm going to look at one more thing on this. I'm going to jump to look at Article 9. So here is the spot where you realize when you think about what your job is to design something, it's to do models, it's to make sections and plans and all of that. But what effectively you're doing, and obviously there's many ways to think about what your job is, but for this purposes of this conversation, effectively what you're doing is you are making the contract between the owner and the general contractor. So Article 9 says, all right, here's what this contract is based on. So we've got the contract, the drawing, titles, and what the date. Now that might change over a span of time, hence you might have multiples. Contract can get updated with new dates if there's a new drawing set, but you can't have the A101 function if it's not referencing a specific set of contract documents. The reason they're called contract documents is because they are part of this contract. They get pulled into the contract by this Article 9 right here, where we list them out, and it becomes like the contract is meaningless unless there's a drawing set and a specification set and whatever else is part of the contract documents listed here. Because if it's not listed here, then it's not part of the contract, and there's nothing to achieve. There's no design intent available to achieve by the contractor. So a key section there. I'm going to look at one last one, and then we're going to look at one other little bit before we end this off.
One thing while Mike is searching for that, let's see who asked that question. I just lost you, but someone just asked a smart question. So if you wanted to actually, I think one of the first things Mike said was to read the contracts, and you might say, how? How do I read those contracts? Where do I find them? And actually the AIA has free sample contracts for you guys to download. I don't have the URL real handy. I'm sure you could Google it, or you can contact your local AIA chapter. They'll be happy to get you connected up with their sample contracts.
Yeah, and it's an easy system to get. Like I said, start with these three, and then you can decide if you feel you need to or want to get into more. So absolutely, definitely go grab those things, because reading them through will make a big difference. But like I said, if you just read them without thinking of these themes, it would be very difficult to really grasp what's going on. All right, last thing I want to mention on the B101 and the A101. So this is the B101, the owner architect agreement, and it's the section that talks about additional services. So there's a set bunch of information that is expected as part of a sort of standard architectural project. If you're not doing all of that, then you would want to do a different contract, because if you were only doing, say, schematic design or something like that, then you'd want a contract that just said that's what you were doing. But the sort of expectation, the standard expectation, is sort of built into the contract. But then there's all sorts of things that are done often but are not part of the expected built into the contract thing. And so you can add them in just by essentially checking a box here, giving a little bit of information. So just kind of scan through these. Programming. Programming is supplied by the owner. Every once in a while the owner needs some help, so you can do it as an additional service. Personally, I think it's a bad idea. I think it should be done as a separate contract. I think having a contract that's about what the program is and then including writing the program in the contract doesn't really make a lot of sense, but it happens all the time, and you can do it right here. Do you need to have multiple preliminary designs, multiple schematic designs? Do you need special detailed cost estimating? You can see down here in this one. Do you need record drawings? Do you need any post-occupancy evaluations? Do you need the architect to coordinate something that the owner is bringing in, like specialty people who the owner is bringing in? Historic preservation, multiple bid packages, et cetera, et cetera. So there's all sorts of information that is put in here. So there's a set idea of how the contract is going to work, and then it has these ways to get it manipulated in order to fit to the overall. Okay, I'm going to take 2 seconds just to look at the A201, the general conditions. We talked about things like the work and the project and all those sorts of terms. Anything that was capitalized or in bold or anything like that in those other two contracts, well, those are going to be defined in this A201. So as soon as I get there, lots of beginning. You can see it's all about coordinating from contract to contract. All right, here we go. When you look at the beginning of the A201, it talks about the contract documents. So what are those? And it's explained. The contract, the work with a capital W, well, that's the project itself, the physical building of the project. The capital P project includes beyond the actual contractor's work. Specifications, instruments of service. Instruments of service is all the work that the architect does beyond just the contract documents. There's a whole series of different elements that are clearly defined and identified in the A201. And the whole point here is that by having the A201 exist, it allows us to have a simpler version of the A101 and the B101 and all of the consultant agreements and the construction manager agreement and et cetera, et cetera. All of those things can be simpler and more to the point because the A201 establishes all of the sort of basic pieces of information that are going to work for everybody. So hence they're called the general conditions. And by signing the B101 and signing the A101, you're incorporating this understanding, the A201's understanding of timelines, of definitions, of processes, are all built into those other documents because the A201 is incorporated into them, right into those the A101 and the B101 and all of those other contracts.
Beautiful. So a couple questions here, Mike.
Yeah.
The first one is to mention the exams that require contracts, and I actually think there's a couple of there's a handful of them.
The two that require the contracts are the first two in the series, which are the practice management and project management. Both of those will rely heavily on issues of project delivery. So is it design bid build? Is it design build? Is it construction manager, et cetera, et cetera? And that question is essentially a contracts question. And so those two will be filled very heavily with contract questions, but you will actually get a few contract questions through all of them. And the other one that I would mention specifically would be the last one, which is CE, construction and evaluation. That one, because your role is essentially to help the owner understand what's going on and to help the contractor fulfill their contracted need to actually make the building. There's a lot of little contractual elements there, change orders and construction change directives and all of those things that show up in these contracts. So you actually do it through all of them, but the first two, absolutely, and the last one, absolutely. The other one's a little bit less so, but they'll definitely show up.
Okay, and one more question here. When a problem arises on the job site, so this is from Jay. Jay says, when a problem arises on the job site, the contractor will have to communicate it through the architect, who would then pass it along to the owner. Would it always have to be done through writing, aka a formal documentation, or can it be done verbally?
It can be done verbally as long as it's written somewhere. So what does that mean? That means one of the things that the NCARB you'll find as you go through, like, if one of the possible answers is make it into a bureaucracy, that's the answer, right? So if somebody does something verbally, let's say an owner changes part of the design, like in the middle of the process, they realize now that they understand the drawings better, they want to take something out of the design. Well, then it should show up in the design log that the architect keeps. If the contractor says something that should go to the owner, it should make it into the meeting minutes that the owner is then privy to and can can then respond to. It might make it into, if there's a specific response that's needed, it would make it into the action items on the meeting minutes that then become a memo that goes to the owner and that they're then expected to respond to it. So parts of the process can be done verbally, but from an NCARB standpoint, from an exam standpoint, it should all eventually be found in some documented form.
Beautiful. All right, great. Well, we'll go ahead and end it there. So For everybody here, our next ARE Live podcast, we'll be sharing the best tips and tricks from A’19 and those attendees who we've met there and who've passed the ARE. Again, if you'd like to come by and meet us, you're welcome to do so. We will be at booth 7138, so we'll be there for the whole thing. We've also posted a link in the chat box in the GoToWebinar control panel, so you can go just down there and click that link, or you can go to blackspectacles.com/podcast to register to attend. To learn more about our ARE exam prep curriculum, you can go to blackspectacles.com, where you can try out any of the free course videos. And if you would like your boss to pay for your membership, be sure to visit blackspectacles.com/firm to learn more about our firm memberships of any size. For those of you who are ready to start preparing for the ARE right now, you can use coupon code KYC52819YT to get a 15% discount for the entire duration of your exam prep membership. And then finally, tomorrow we'll send you an email follow-up about today's live broadcast, so please let us know what you think. Share any suggestions you may have. I promise that we read every word that you write and use them to tune our next episodes. So look forward to seeing many of you at A’19, and for those who've tuned in, thanks for watching.
And come out and see us, and come talk to me and tell me what's going on. And don't be afraid to read the contracts. Just dive in, get them downloaded, dive in and read them. It's by far, now that you have an understanding of how these things work, it's by far the best way to get into the detail.
Awesome. All right, thanks guys.